informing the public, letting the public know what happens in court, I think is a healthy thing. I think the more attention, the better on the processes of the court system, because I think it helps debunk some myths about how we do our business.
Okay, so that was almost a year ago when Ada County Judge Michael Oates told us why he would usually allow cameras in his courtroom. Back then, we were talking about cameras being allowed for the Lori Vallow Daybell murder trial. That judge, Judge Stephen Boyce, well, he ultimately said no, saying continued visual coverage would be a risk to fair administration of justice. Well, we're facing the same possibility 11 months later. Brian Kohberger is the man charged with killing 4 University of Idaho students last year. This Friday, we expect a hearing to help the judge decide if cameras can capture Kohberger's trial. Again, nearly a year ago, Judge Boyce used precedent to make his decision to ban them, a 1965 case known as Estes versus Texas. Taking a look at Kohberger's motion to also keep cameras out of the courtroom, his lawyers cited that same case, and they referenced it 10 times throughout the 7-page motion. So this seems like a good time to bring in Andrew Bartline to help explain kind of how we got to this point to push the cameras out of the courtroom and why this seems to be becoming more common. Andrew?
Yeah, well, state law says a judge has the power to regulate cameras in their courtroom as they see fit. The state of Idaho judicial branch says the court must weigh constitutional factors with legal precedent, which can often look like a battle between free speech, freedom of the press, the First Amendment, which most people know, will against the defendant's right to a fair trial. And it looks like the playbook is set in Idaho behind that 65 court case you brought up, Estes versus Texas. Now, quoting that directly in Kohberger's motion, it says, the chief function of our judicial machinery is to ascertain the truth. The use of television, however, cannot be said to contribute materially to this objective. Rather, its use amounts to the injection of an irrelevant factor into court proceedings. Pretty strong language there, but it's paraphrased very similarly by the judge in Vallow's trial, where they say the scope of the coverage cannot supersede the rights of all parties to the fair administration of justice in this case. So that's sort of how that's paraphrased there. Well, Estes overturned a conviction in the 60s. That's why it's a big case that gets a lot of attention. And the judge said in that case, media turned a man's pretrial proceedings into a theater. Again, that's the judge's language from the 60s. Pretrial, a big part of it. Why? Well, the jury hasn't been selected yet. So in Kohberger's motion, his lawyers say the media is breaking the rules clearly set by Judge. The judge so far has said and warned cameras cannot focus only on the defendant. Estes recognizes this as a form of mental harassment. Again, language from that case in the 60s. And the motion leans into it, saying, quote, Mr. Kohberger is entitled to defend himself against capital criminal charges without cameras focused on his fly. Getting a little cute with the language there. We've already heard the judge say the First Amendment is not absolute, again with his warnings. We know multiple factors go into that decision, and asked a law professor at the University of Idaho to explain that thought process and what it actually looks like.
I think the issue with cameras and videotaping in a courtroom is not impeding access to courts necessarily. Courts are still open for the most part. There are certain proceedings that you won't be able to see, but the ones that you're able to by administrative rule, you can go in and watch them, you can get the transcripts or the audio recordings, and so there's other ways to access court proceedings and still see those without having cameras in the courtroom. And some of the concerns may be witnesses might not want to come forward, their testimony might be impeded if they know that cameras are on them. If it's individuals in the courtroom recording, maybe it ends up on social media, maybe it's clipped in a way that doesn't fairly and accurately represent what happened. The rule of law and what happens in proceedings is very important. I understand that it makes it a little more interesting if you can see the players and see how proceedings unfold, particularly in big cases where not everybody can get a seat in the courtroom. Not everybody has the ability to access a courthouse or a courtroom to see it, but there are other ways you can get that information. Court orders, transcripts, audio recordings, and then of course the job that reporters do in reporting on what happens in a courtroom.
I'll argue firsthand the job of reporter is a little more difficult to report what happens in that courtroom when you don't have a camera, especially through our media. But Professor Ball adds a single camera is often used as a compromise. A pool cam is what they call it, where one camera captures that scene. That footage is distributed to multiple outlets. We expect this motion asking to ban cameras from the courtroom to be addressed in a hearing this Friday. The judge will hear the defense's arguments, weigh those values Professor Ball explained, then make a decision. Or guess what, Brian? This won't shock you. Maybe he doesn't make a decision. Could be pushed on to a later date. This trial has had plenty of delays. For example, Kohberger waived his right to a speedy trial. Also, that hearing Friday was supposed to include his grand jury indictment. There's a motion to dismiss that from the defense as well.
Yeah.
That's been pushed back a month, so we'll see where it goes.
And just for full disclosure, KTVB is on the side of wanting to have a camera in the courtroom. Right. That's the side that we are going to be on with this hearing whenever it's held. Thank you very much, Andrew.